Just
10.
there. Chapter 10, yeah. So,
Chapter 10?
yes.
John?
No. Genesis.
Genesis.
That was the sermon. So, chapter 10. So this is usually called the Table of Nations.
Oh.
And it's called that because all these different names are the fathers of different nations. And we'll see that it's grouped into three groupings, known as three sons.
Mhm.
And those three groupings happen to line up with the three continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa. And you'll notice that the groupings, and we don't know where all of these places are. The names are very, very old. And so, and in Hebrew. And so not a lot of the information about where they were is preserved, but we can get an idea by thinking of these three groupings, and the ones that we do know kind of inform the others. And there's a few little oddities as well, so I'll try and point those out. Now it says, now this is the history of the generations of the sons of Noah and of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Now Magog, you might remember, is from Ezekiel, Gog from Magog, right? And Revelation, where it says Gog and Magog. Once again, we have no idea where that is.
Okay.
All right, the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. Of these were the islands of the nations divided in their lands, everyone of the nations divided in their lands, everyone after his language, after their families, in their nations. So quite likely these are the nations of Europe. And, well, we'll get there. All right, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. Now we know where all these places are, except for Put. Cush is Ethiopia, Mitzrayim is Egypt, Canaan, obviously, is the land of Israel, and Put, we know from archaeology that Put was known to the Egyptians, and it was thought to be south of Ethiopia, but the Egyptians didn't know where it was. So we don't know exactly where it was, only that it was somewhere in Africa. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. And you might notice Sheba being the queen of Sheba came to Solomon during that time. Cush became the father of Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. There is likely some myth about Nimrod that is lost, but it probably comes from Assyrian mythology, and that's because the next verse, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin. Between Nineveh and the great city of Calah, Mitzrayim became the father of Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtahim, Pathrusim, Casulim, which the Philistines are descended from, and Caphtorim. So at this point, we see that there's a bit of overlap, right? Nimrod is born in Cush, goes all the way up to Assyria. Here we have the sons of, and I just said it, the sons of Mitzrayim, which kind of go everywhere as well, right? The Philistines are currently thought to have been descended from the Greeks. And the idea is that the people of Mitzrayim went to Greece and from there to Philistine, to what would now be called Palestine. And it's the same spelling, it's one letter different. Canaan became the father of Sidon, right? And Sidon is to the north. That would be Syria. His first Sidon, right? And Sidon is to the north. That would be Syria. His firstborn, excuse me, it's not Syria, it's Lebanon? A little fuzzy there. Okay. Heth, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archonites, the Sinites, right, from Sinai, the Arvadites, the Zimrites, and the Himathites. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were spread abroad. The border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as you go towards Gerar, to Gaza, as you go towards Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, to Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, according to their languages, in their lands and their nations. So the sons of Ham are largely Africa.
Yeah.
But you notice they kind of go everywhere as
Right.
well. Children were also born to Shem, the elder brother of Japheth, the father of all the children of Eber. The sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphashad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram were Hul, Gether, and Mash. So now we have the lands to the east. Remember that curse that was put on Canaan? That Canaan would be spread about into the tents of the other nations? And here we see that the sons of Ham are spread about not just the continent of Africa, but also the other two continents. They spread out from Africa. And in a way, yes, it does this explanation through a curse, but it explains how people from Africa ended up spreading to the other continents. And that people in the time of Genesis were seemingly aware of this. All right, to Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan became the father of Almadad, Shalef, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. And you might have noticed there's some duplicates there. All these were sons of Joktan. Their dwelling extends from Mesha, as you go towards Shephar, to the mountains of the east. These are the sons of Shem by their families, according to their languages, lands, and nations. So these are the families of the sons of Noah by their generations, according to their nations, the nations divided from these in the earth after the flood. So you might remember the covenant with Noah that they were to spread across the whole earth and subdue it and to be fruitful and multiply. In chapter 11 now, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. As they traveled east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they lived there. They said to one another, "Come, let's bake bricks and burn them thoroughly." they had brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. Now, the land of Shinar is Babylon, all right? It's that Mesopotamia region. And you'll notice something that it says here, they used bricks for stone and tar for mortar. And what's normally used for stone is, well, stone cut from the earth, and mortar, mud dug from the earth. And, well, stone cut from the earth, and mortar, mud dug from the earth. And it's almost like it's saying that they're rejecting what is natural and doing something industrial. And they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the sky, and let's make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad on the surface of the whole earth." So here they're rejecting nature and they're rejecting God's covenant. Right? The bricks for stone, the tar for mortar, and come, let's not be scattered. And then I love the parallelism in what God does compared to what humanity does here. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men built. The Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing will be withheld from them, which they intend to do. Come, let's go down." Remember that? The people said, "Come, let's go and make a name for ourselves." Now God says, "Come, let's go and confuse their language." That they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there on the surface of all the earth. They stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. From there the Lord scattered them abroad on the surface of all the earth. And this is something, too, we'll see a bit of wordplay. Babel, by the way, is used for Babylon throughout the entire Bible. This is the only place in which your Bible leaves it untranslated. And it's because it makes sense in English. The wordplay makes sense. But throughout the Bible, it says Babel. And we'll see in Genesis and in other books of the Bible where they use wordplay to make fun of their enemies. So, for example, the Canaanite god Baal, one of his titles is Baal-zebul, the great and powerful Baal. And they change one letter to Baal-zebub, to Baal of the flies.
Jeez.
And they make fun of their enemies in this way. And there were two kingdoms of Israel, and there was Israel and Judah. And throughout the Bible, they even make fun of one another's ancestors. So this is a bit of fun that they have throughout the Bible. And it's meant to be taken tongue in cheek.
Okay.
So in verse 10, this is the history of the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old when he became the father of Arphaxad, 2 years after the flood. Shem lived 500 years after he became the father of Arphaxad and became the father of more sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. Arphaxad lived 403 years after he became the father of Shelah and became the father of more sons and daughters. Shelah lived 30 years and became the father of Eber. Eber lived 403 years after he became the father of Eber and became the father of more sons and daughters. So once again, we have this descending order of years in the genealogy.
Right.
Right? right? There's fewer years between them having their son and fewer years of their life, just like the last genealogy we had. I forgot to point something out about the Table of Nations. There's 70 nations. When you subtract the ones that are double counted, that are named twice, there's exactly 70 of them. And so this is why we have 70 used as the number that represents the nations of the world. It comes from the Table of Nations. There are 70 names in the list. It also is interesting that the Septuagint is called the LXX, the 70. It's a translation for the nations, and there are said to have been 70 translators, and they each translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek individually and in seclusion. And when they came together, they had the same translation, which is, of course, ridiculous.
I know. How can that happen?
Yes, because of the old joke, if you ask a question of 3 rabbis, you'll get 4 opinions. So how could they agree? 70 of them agree. But it's a good legend, and it represents the purpose of the Septuagint to be a translation for the nations. All right. I think we can skip ahead here. There's not a whole lot of meaning to be gained from this, but we get to verse 25. Nahor lived 119 years after he became the father of Terah and became the father of more sons and daughters. Terah lived 70 years, right? That's an important number, and became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And there we have 70 representing the nations, and we have 3 representing a climactic number. Or excuse me, representing an important number. So these 3 are supposed to grab our attention. All right, verse 27. Now, this is the history of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran became the father of Lot. Haran died in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldees, while his father Terah was still alive. Abram and Nahor married wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, who was also the father of Iscah. Now, before I go on, there's a few fun little theories about these few verses. One is that Ur of the Chaldees is not Ur of Babylon. And if we have a map, and I apologize to the people who are watching online. Okay. I need a big map here. Let's see. It shows. Okay. Now here on my map, it shows, I'll show you first. It shows Ur down here in Babylon. Up here is Haran, which is the place of Haran's birth. But up here are the Chaldean mountains. And there is a little city up in these mountains called Ur. And it happens to be Ur of the Chaldees.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So if Abraham was born here, he did not in fact come from Babylon. He came from Assyria. Now, your turn. Here we go. So we have Ur of Babylon, right, of Samaria. But way up here is Haran, up in Assyria. And up here are the Chaldean mountains. And around here is a little city called Ur of the Chaldees. And so it may, in fact, be that Abram did not come from Ur of Babylon. He came from Ur of Assyria. All right, and I'll see if I can show this online now for anyone joining us up there. All right, down here, you have Ur. Oops, I'm viewing this backwards. Okay, down here you have Ur of Babylon, and up here is Haran of Assyria. All right, to the north of Haran are the Chaldean mountains. And right around here is a little village called Ur of the Chaldees. So it may be that Abram was born here instead of way down here where it's traditionally thought. But of course, we have no evidence that Abram was born in any particular place. We have no archaeological evidence of his birth. Now, another little fun fact is that Abram and Sarai are, they sound similar to Brahma and Sarai. The god and goddess of, at least a god and goddess, one of the Trimurti and Tridevi and Trimurti, and they are husband and wife. And if you were to transliterate those into Hebrew, this is how you would do it. And so there is an idea that Abram and Sarai came not from Assyria or Babylon, but all the way from India. In the time of Josephus, there was one of the Greek philosophers, and I forget exactly which one, but he thought that the Hebrew people were descended from what he called the Indian philosophers. And so he thought that people from Israel came from India originally.
I had a friend, I met her in Hawaii, and her name was Sarai. And she was LDN, she was a nurse, and she said she was from India. And so the name is familiar to me, Sarai.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she looked Indian,
Yeah.
And anyway.
And it's the name of one of their goddesses, one of the Hindu goddesses.
Okay.
And so Brahma and Sarai are husband and wife.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, I can't name all three of the gods and three of the goddesses off the top of my head. I feel a little unprepared, but and I think that the ambiguity that we have here, it might not have been intentional in its time, but then again, maybe it was. There was, during the late Bronze Age, there was basically a dark age at the end of the Bronze Age, and all documentation in this area was just lost. And it went from Greece to Egypt to Babylon, where for some reason those civilizations all collapsed at the same time. And so everything from before the time of David, we have no records of. It's not until the Iron Age, at the time of David, and it's one of his descendants, Omri, is where the archaeological record picks up again. So everything we're reading is slightly mythical. And it's because all the records were lost. Civilization literally collapsed, all the records were lost, and this represents an oral history. So until the time of David, all of this was an oral history. And we at least know that in the time of the two kingdoms, all of this was edited. It was edited back together. And 2 Kings tells us how the Torah was rediscovered, and we can tell from the way they put it back together that some editing was done. So it might be intentional that Abraham's exact origin is not known. We know his father, right? that he lived 70 years before becoming a father. That 70 represents all of the nations. His three sons, right, represent that this is a point of importance. And Abram's exact birthplace is unknown. And his name is somewhat ambiguous. It could come from Assyria, it could come from Babylon, it could come from Assyria, it could come from Babylon, it could come from as far away as India. And I think it's meant to include all those people in the narrative of the Bible. So it's meant to, whatever nation you are from, this is your father, this is your grandfather, this is your ancestor. Think of him that. Abram and Nahor married wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, who was also the father of Iscah. That's another goddess. That's a Sumerian goddess. All right, Sarai was barren. She had no child. By the way, this is another turning point in the narrative. Notice that no one so far has been barren.
Right. You're all having children.
Right. Right. No one has been barren. But now Sarai is barren. Terah took Abram, his son, Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. They went from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. They came to Haran and lived there. So Haran, they get there before they get to the land of Canaan, obviously. We just looked at the map. The days of Terah were 205 years. Terah died in Haran. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country and your relatives and your father's house and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who treats you in contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you." So, one of the commentaries I was reading earlier is that Sarai being barren has to do with God's call. Abraham is the first to be called by faith to leave his home and to go into another land. And while everyone else, they have children in the normal way, Abram and Sarai do not. They have children by faith. And so we'll see 3 generations of barren women who cannot naturally conceive, but God gives them children. And each time is a blessing, an act of faith. And so this is God's covenant with Abram, that he will be the father of all nations. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife, Lot his brother's son, all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran. And they went to go into the land of Canaan. They entered into the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, Canaanites were in the land. So the oak of Moreh is at the base of these 2 hills, right? It's in a valley. It's at the base of 2 hills. And this is an important site that shows up more than just this once. But Shechem is another important site to keep in mind. is. It's quite beautiful. I've seen pictures of it.
Have you?
Mhm. And I don't believe there's an oak tree there still. At least not the same oak tree. The two hills. I'm trying to remember. I think that comes up again in Joshua. So the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your offspring. He built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. He left from there to go to the mountain on the east side of Bethel and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the Lord's name. Abram traveled, still going on towards the south. Abram traveled, still going on towards the south. There was a famine in the land. Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that you have done? Oh, it skipped a page. Excuse me. There was a famine in the land. Abram went down to Egypt to live as a foreigner there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he had come near to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, See now, I know that you are a beautiful woman to look at. It will happen that when the Egyptians see you, they will say, This is his wife. They will kill me, but they will save you alive. Please say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that my soul may live because of you. When Abram had come into Egypt, Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He dealt well with Abram for her sake. He had sheep, cattle, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. The Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that you have done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, She is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now, therefore, see your wife, take her, and go your way. Pharaoh commanded men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that he had. It's a really weird story.
Yeah.
And even weirder standing on its own. But the longest story in Genesis is the story of Joseph. And I want you to think of Joseph going to Egypt now in the same circumstances during a famine, right? Well, not going to Egypt now in the same circumstances during a famine, right? Well, not during a famine, but his family comes during a famine. And it's very much paralleling this story. Joseph comes to Egypt in chains, right? He comes as a slave, and Pharaoh blesses him, but they stay in Egypt. And the successive generations are not blessed by Pharaoh. They're put into slavery. And here, right, they're very much exploited by the Egyptians in that later generation. But here, Abram comes to Pharaoh, and Abram does not bless Pharaoh, right? He does something crafty that comes at a cost to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh sends him away. Joseph, on the other hand, works for Pharaoh's good, and his sons and daughters pay the price, right? They are sold into slavery. And so the two are back to back, right? They're mirror images of one another. Abram comes in a sense doing evil to Pharaoh, and he's blessed. Joseph comes doing good, and he's cursed. So these stories are back to back. But it also shows us that there's, even though we're told Abram is a man of faith, we're shown there are limits to his faith too. He's not a Superman, right? He's not perfect. And that's very much what we're shown of each of the patriarchs. They're good men, but they're not necessarily great men. They're not Supermen. All right. Chapter 13. Abram went up out of Egypt, he, his wife, all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. Now, we're talking about the south of Canaan now, because it says he goes up out of Egypt, which means we're heading towards Jerusalem. So Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. He went on his journeys from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first. There Abram called on the Lord's name. I kind of wonder if it's ambiguous as to whether or not he had been calling on the Lord the whole time, because we see that he calls on the Lord. Well, we see that the Lord calls him, the Lord visits him, and then Abram goes down to Egypt and acts without faith. But now that he's come up out of Egypt, he calls on the Lord.
Kind of like a duality that's not quite,
Mm-hmm.
not, to me, not kosher, but that's the way it is.
It is. And at this time, keep in mind, Abram is the first person to be an Israelite. He is kind of the first Israelite, the first Jew. And he is coming to that with this very Gentile perspective. To him, the gods are attached to the land. God called him in Canaan. He called him to Canaan, and he visited him in Canaan. So this God is the God of Canaan. He's attached to the land. So when he goes to Egypt, there are different gods in Egypt. So why would he continue calling on God in Egypt when God is the God of Canaan? So here we're seeing Abram learning something about God. He's not just the God of Canaan. And it might make sense that Abram hasn't learned that about God yet. He has faith while he's in Canaan. All right, so there Abram called on the Lord's name. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks, herds, and tents. The land was not able to bear them, that they might live together, for their possessions were so great that they couldn't live together. In other words, there's not enough fields for all their livestock. They're eating too much grass. There was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock, right? They all want to impress the boss. The Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land at the time. Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are relatives. Isn't the whole land before you? Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, I will go to the left." So this represents to Abram's faith and his generosity. It's really the first we see of it. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. It reminds me of something that is said later when the Israelites come out of Egypt, that the land you are going into, right, they're talking about Israel, is not like the land that you came from. The land in Egypt is well watered, and the river flows through it. And
The Nile.
when when the farmers they build up their levees at the edge of their field, and when they want to water it, they take their foot and depress the edge of the levee, and the water just runs into the field. But Israel isn't like that.
Yeah.
It is
It's
a dry
arid.
place.
It's
It's arid, and you have to work the land. And so when Lot is looking to the land of the Jordan, right, and we might even say the land of Jordan today, he says it's like Egypt. It's an easily watered, easily worked land. It's going to be easy for him to live there. Like the garden of the Lord, like the Garden of Eden. So Lot chose the plain of the Jordan for himself. Lot traveled east, and they separated themselves from one another. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, and Lot lived in the cities of the plain, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. So we see Lot doing something selfish and moving towards Sodom. It's foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Where exceedingly wicked and sinners, now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot was separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For I will give all the land which you see to you and to your offspring forever." It just makes me think of the Lion King. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring may also be counted. Arise, walk through the land in its length and in its width, for I will give it to you. Abram moved his tent and came and lived by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Now in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, that would be Babylon again, Arioch, king of Elasar, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, the king, brave attempt, the king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim. That's interestingly transliterated. They made war with Barah, king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, also called Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, also called the Salt Sea. That would probably be the Dead Sea today.
The Dead Sea.
Yep. They served Chedorlaomer for 12 years, and in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and struck the Rephaim in the Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, the Amim in Shaveh Kiriathim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, to El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And by the wilderness would be it's the desert to the south. They returned and came to En Mishpat and called Kadesh, and struck all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites that lived in Hazaron Tamar, the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim, And the king of Bela, also called Zoar, went out, and they set the battle in array against them in the valley of Siddim, against the Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against the 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and some fell there. Those who remained fled to the hills. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went their way. They took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who lived in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. One who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew. At that time, he lived by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Anar. They were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his relative was taken captive, he led out his 318 trained men born in his house and pursued as far as Dan. He divided himself against them by night, he and his servants, and struck them and pursued them to Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, and also brought back his relative Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the other people. The king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings who were with him, at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. So here's something interesting as well. So not only does Abram defeat these weakened kings, most likely in a weakened state, but he defeats these kings, brings back everyone for his nephew's sake. But he meets Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and Salem is Jerusalem. Before it was Jerusalem, and Melchizedek is said to be the priest of God Most High. So a priest of God Most High before there was a priesthood of Levi. So before Aaron was a priest, before the Levitical priests, there was a priest there in Jerusalem. And it says he brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. So the bread and the wine, this is why in Hebrews we have Jesus is said to be a priest of Melchizedek, and the bread and wine still symbolize that priesthood today. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram gave him 1/10 of all. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people and take the goods for yourself." Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted up my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread, nor a sandal strap, nor anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.' I will accept nothing from you, except that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Anar, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion." So here we have the idea of giving 1/10. That is no longer practiced in the church. And the king of Sodom wants his portion of the spoils. By the way, Sodom lost the war,
right,
and isn't entitled to any of the spoils.
the nerve of him.
Right? But he also wants the people. That would include Lot. And that would give him something over Abram. Abram sees this and says, no, I'm not taking anything from you. So Abram does see the trap. But we also have something else going on here. Melchizedek introduces Abram to the idea that his God is not just the God of Canaan, but the God Most High. And so this is planting the seed in Abram's mind that the God he's been following is not just the God of Canaan, that God is a much bigger God than that. So I'm sure that will bother some people, that Abram had some learning to do. But I think it's fascinating that Abram is called by God, Abram meets God, but Abram still doesn't know everything. He's still got a long way to go. And so I think this is where we'll call it in chapter 15.
Okay.
So any questions before we conclude?
It's just it's really interesting how it all flows, rolls out, and gives you the good and the bad, and in between the stories that come up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
What a learning.
think it's
Interesting.
I think it's encouraging that everyone in the Bible, all these people that God calls, are really a mixed bag of the good and the bad.
Right.
You know, they're not like Greek heroes. They're not demigods. They're not this unattainable standard. They're just people.
They're just people.
All right. Well, I'm going to end the live stream there.